And we're starting. So we'll cut back over to the slides. No, and let us commence to, as they say, kick it. Okay. 2/3 of all Cnidarian species are Anthozoa, which is the group we just talked about. That's soft corals, sea anemones, hard corals, reef-building corals, and so on. Most of what you know as jellyfish are in the class Scyphozoa. All of the Cnidarians we're going to talk about from here on out do have that alternation of generations thing, which I mentioned and then promptly started talking about the species that don't have it. But Scyphozoans do, and at some point tomorrow I'll try to show you slides of this. There's a stage where they're a polyp, looking superficially like a tiny anemone, generally not big. We're talking a couple of millimeters in size. The polyp is partitioned by 4 septi, and the medusas bud from the oral end of the polyp. And they bud along lines that are perpendicular to the long axis. I'll show you a picture of this in a minute, but the upshot is that I may not have a picture in this slide presentation, but I'll show you a slide of it tomorrow if I don't. But the upshot is that a budding Scyphozoan polyp looks almost like a stack of dishes. What you have is a little polyp. Again, looks superficially like a little sea anemone. It's got little tentacles and everything. And it buds it starts dividing in a direction that's perpendicular to the long axis. And up at the top, you have divisions that are almost ready to break free and go swimming off on their own. And below that, you have divisions that aren't quite as mature yet, and they're stacked one on top of the other in a way that's hauntingly reminiscent of a stack of dishes or a stack of teacups or something like that. If you imagine a stack of dishes with the dishes on the top ready to break free from the stack and go swimming off, that's kind of the best description of a Scyphozoan that I can give. The process of budding is called strobilation. And if I don't get the chance to demonstrate concretely what this looks like right now, I'll show you in pictures tomorrow. The Scyphozoan medusa is relatively large. Scyphozoan polyps, again, tend to be on the millimeter scale, maybe a little bigger, but not much. Scyphozoan medusae can get up to 6 feet wide. The gastrovascular cavity, remember, that's the gut, and the gut often branches, and it forms a branching network of what we call radial canals that branch through the mesoglia and ultimately get food to all parts of the jellyfish body. And jellyfish actually have more sensory organs than you might expect, even considering that they've got a network of nerves but no actual brain. There are sensory lobes on the edge of the bell called the rhopalia, with balance organs called statocysts, and sometimes with eyes or at least light-sensitive spots as well. Almost forgot to start. There's that. There's about 200 species in different orders, and I think I'm just going to walk through pictures of these. Don't worry about memorizing the details. But coronates are mostly deeper sea species, and the edge of the bell is divided into these flaps called lappets. Semiostomes, the mouth is surrounded by 4 extremely long oral arms in addition to tentacles around the edge of the bell. Semiostome means flag mouth. You might know the word semaphore is a way of signaling using a pair of flags that you're waving. If you've seen old movies about, like World War II movies about the Navy, you might have seen flagmen standing on the decks of carriers or something like that with a pair of flags where they're doing what looks like a fancy version of the YMCA dance. That's semaphore, and semiastome means flag mouth because they've got these long oral arms that surround the mouth. Its mouth is shaped kind of like a cross. Rhizostomes don't have any tentacles on the margin of the bell, but the mouth is subdivided into lots of tiny mouths. What you happen is you start with a simple mouth, and it's kind of hard to explain without drawing. I kind of miss having a good sturdy blackboard at my back. Let's just say that, okay, if I took your mouth and could somehow stitch up the center of it, I would have, right, one opening on the left and one opening on the right, and then kind of close off the middle. So you'd kind of have two mouths or two mouth openings emptying into a common cavity. And now imagine we do that hundreds of times, and you end up with multiple tiny little mouths that all open into a common gastrovascular cavity, and these tiny mouths are on the tips of branches of 8 oral arms. So you have multiple tiny mouths that are all connected by canals to the central gastrovascular cavity. It's kind of weird. I'll try to show you an example of it in a bit. And then finally, the Stauromedusa, the Medusa stage, is not free swimming anymore. It's actually permanently stuck on the polyp. So they still do have this alternation of generations, except the Medusa doesn't get to swim. Okay, there's a coronate Scyphozoan. This is a very common invertebrate in deep water. What you can see is that the edge of the bell is divided into these kind of semicircular flaps. Those are called the marginal lappets. And the bell has a furrow that separates the central part of the bell from the zone of lappets. This evidently reminded somebody of a crown. The coronate means the crowned ones, the crown jellyfish. And again, Paraphila is, years ago, I actually got to go on an oceanographic cruise out of Los Angeles. And we put down deep sea dredges and hauled up samples of what was swimming around at roughly 1,000 feet. And the answer is an awful lot of these guys. They can be very abundant in deeper water, but they don't often come to the surface. They don't often wash ashore. There you've got a semiastome, the purple striped jellyfish. You can see that bell up there at the top is shaped like a mushroom. You can barely see that the rim of the bell has tentacles, but the very, very long and frilly things that are hanging down from the center of the bell are these frilly oral arms that do an awful lot of the ultimate food trapping. Anything that blunders into those oral arms is going to get stung. And then the oral arms contract and deliver whatever the food is up to the mouth that's in the middle of the fore. So the mouth is up under the bell, and it's surrounded by these things that look like extremely long flags or pennants. So now you can see why these are called the flagmouth jellyfish. These are unique, by the way, because these are the only jellyfish that are capable of singing. And they actually sing very well. They'll swim up to you and sing, "So here I am with oral arms." I can still hit those high notes. You know, something like, oh, how about this finish? Hoping you'll see. Oh yeah, hoping you'll see how I'll sting you, tee oral Okay, record company executives call me through my department. Right. Okay. There's another ginormous one. This one was actually described by somebody I knew who went to grad school at Berkeley just after I did, named Lisa Gershwin. She is currently one of the world's top jellyfish experts at, last I heard, James Cook University in Northern Australia, one of the best places in the world to study deadly jellyfish because it's Australia and everything is deadly. But this is one that they were able to document alive. It had been, bits of it had washed up on shore before, but I think they were the first to see a complete one. Chrysoora acleos, the black sea nettle. You can see the bell. That's, of course, the kind of round, mushroomy thing that's closest to the camera lens of that diver. You can see very fine white tentacles around the edge of the bell, but the bulk of this thing is those long, black, frilly, mossy-looking things. That's the oral arms, and that's what does most of, probably all, of the prey capture and feeding. Slightly smaller oral arms are visible on this. This is a very common species called the moon jellyfish, Aurelia aurita. Jellyfish, by the way, are very difficult to keep alive in an aquarium. You can't just put them into a regular tank because, first of all, with a typical tank, they'll just get sucked right up the filter. The other thing is that because these are plankton, they spend their entire lives floating, and they might never in their normal life cycle come into contact with anything at all. They're just floating in open water. And if they bump against the sides of a tank, they'll tear. They're just that delicate. There's something like 99% water. But you can build specialized tanks where the water flows in a circular pattern. They're these round tanks with the flow going around and around in such a way that they never contact the sides. This is called a chrysal tank, by the way. And there are, the Monterey Bay Aquarium was first. They're out in California. But a whole bunch of public aquaria now have jellyfish tanks. And this is one of the most common species that you'll see in them. So I know we can't really easily travel now, but if you ever get a chance to go to a really good public aquarium, I know the Aquarium of the Americas in New Orleans has one of these. So does the Estuarium in Mobile, Alabama. Certainly worth looking for. You can actually see jellyfish alive in the specially built chrysal tanks, and Aurelia is one of the most common ones that you'll see. So you might have a chance to see these in captivity. They don't naturally glow. This is just the lighting. But you can see the four relatively short oral arms coming out of the underside of the bell. There's a mouth in the middle of them. If you look very carefully at the bell, you can see these slightly brighter kind of vein-looking or wrinkle-looking structures in the bell. That's the gastrovascular canals. The main gastrovascular cavity is kind of squarish, but branching off it to get food to all parts of the body are those gastrovascular canals. And the main gastrovascular cavity is actually kind of clover-shaped. And we know this because on the edges of the gastrovascular cavity, you have these C-shaped structures. They're showing up as white from the way that this thing is lit. You can see three of them clearly. The fourth is kind of behind oral arms and not as obvious. But those four C-shaped structures that make up this kind of clover shape, those are gonads. Gametes are released through the mouth. eggs and embryos may actually be brooded on the oral arms for a time before breaking away and leaving. Right. That's a rhizostome jellyfish, the so-called cannonball jellyfish, unusually firm for a jellyfish. There are no tentacles around the rim of the bell, but you can see these white kind of pear-shaped spots on the rim of the bell. There's actually 8 of them. You can see at least 5, I think. Those are sensory organs called rhopalia. They may have light-sensitive spots, and they've also got balance organs that sense the direction of gravity and enable the jellyfish to swim bell end up. And then instead of oral arms, well, actually, you've got a whole bunch of oral arms. All that branchy, mossy-looking stuff on the side away from the bell is branching oral arms with hundreds of thousands of tiny mouths, all emptying into the same gastrovascular cavity. This is actually one you can spot in the Caribbean and as far north as Florida. This is called the upside-down jellyfish. It is, in fact, a jellyfish. You can tell because it's a sexual generation. This will produce eggs and sperm. And anatomically, it's the same as a jellyfish, but it's a jellyfish that's just decided, hey, I don't feel like swimming anymore. It's capable of pulsing through the water like typical jellyfish do. It can use that bell to pulse and squeeze out water, and so kind of slowly, jet pulse itself. It's capable of swimming, but it spends most of its time upside down on the bottom, soaking up the sun, but also stinging little shrimp and things like that and feeding on them. You can see the oral arms there. They're branched. They're kind of sticking out of the bell. And if you look carefully, you can see that the branches of those arms are covered with what looks like mossy stuff. That's actually thousands of little mouths, all of which empty into canals that run down the oral arms and lead to a central stomach within the body. So that's a typical rhizostome root mouth jellyfish, because the mouths are on the ends of these branching structures that reminded somebody of roots. Oh, incidentally, it's brown because it's loaded with symbiotic dinoflagellates as well. This is one that you'll commonly find in shallow, clear water. They're kind of weird because if they're disturbed, they'll actually start spitting out some of those stinging cells, and they float. So if you swim over a whole bunch of these guys, they'll start releasing stinging cells, and they're not strong enough to really hurt, but I'm told it feels kind of like you're swimming through Coke. You get this little tingly sensations on your skin from the stinging cells that Cassiopeia is actually releasing from its own body and coming up to sting you. Fortunately, your skin doesn't let them do you much damage. And there's the last one. That's a Stauromedusa. These are really weird. This is technically a medusa, but it stays permanently attached to a polyp, which in this case is attached to a brown seaweed. This is just a really weird group with the tentacles arranged in 8 little bunches like pom-poms around the edge of the bell. Oh, in many areas, jellyfish populations tend to bloom periodically. It's been claimed, although there's been some people have looked at the data and they don't actually see this pattern, that the blooms have been getting more frequent over the past few decades. That may not be supported by the data anymore. There was a fairly recent reanalysis of it. It's kind of hard to track blooms because many of these appear, these may appear where there's not a lot of people around to see them. But this is a bloom of a jellyfish called Pelagia noctiluca, the mauve stinger. The bell is transparent, but those things in the water that look like purple equal-armed crosses That's actually the jellyfish gonads, those things that look like C's in the moon jelly that we saw a minute ago. And each one of those crosses marks a medusa. Big bloom can shut down beaches. That's an Italian beach in August 2006. Nobody really wants to go swimming if the water and the beach are completely covered with rotting jellyfish. Not only because it's slimy and kind of gross and doesn't smell great, but even a dead jellyfish can still sting you. An estimated 70,000 people got stung in the Mediterranean bloom in August 2006. Because everybody was at the beach, because in many European countries you get an entire month of paid vacation. So everybody packs up and goes off to the beach in August. Of course, they're all a bunch of communists. We'd never do something like that here. Anyway, it can have other impacts besides closing off beaches and people getting stung. There have been cases of blooms of jellyfish damaging the fishing industry. There was a fishing boat in 2009 that actually capsized because it was pulling in a net of, they were hoping it was going to be fish, but it turned out to be nothing but a giant rhizostome jellyfish called Nemopolyma nemuri. And not only did they not get any fish, they actually pulled the boat over. There have been cases of blooms that have wiped out fish farms. A lot of salmon is farmed in places like Scotland and Norway by basically fencing off an entire narrow bay and growing salmon in it. And if a jellyfish bloom gets up into one of those, they can end up eating all of your baby fish. There was actually a case in 2013 of a reactor at the largest nuclear power plant in the world in Sweden having to be shut down when its coolant intake was blocked by a big bloom of moon jellies. Why they happen? They seem to happen when temperatures are high. It's been suggested that an increase in the frequency of blooms might have something to do with global climate change, although that's disputed. Blooms tend to appear in places where you have anoxic areas on the bottom of the ocean, the so-called dead zones, because jellyfish, being about 99% water, need less oxygen than something like fish. Fish have a much higher metabolic rate. Jellyfish are mostly water, and they don't swim strongly, and they can kind of, go with the flow, drift with the tide, so they can live in anoxic areas where other things can't. There's also some predators on jellyfish. Leatherback sea turtles are noted for it. They've got, strong mouths with a horn-like beak. They're not particularly bothered by the stings. And leatherbacks are threatened by everything from loss of spawning grounds to plastic floating in the ocean, which they mistake for jellyfish, to getting caught in nets and things like that. And as we lose the critters that are specialized to prey on jellyfish, this may be increasing the likelihood of jellyfish blooms. Certainly something that needs to be studied more. Okay, last group I think I'm going to cover today. Cubozoa are called box jellies. These are the ones that will freaking kill you. These are the deadliest of all jellyfish. In these, the polyp gives rise to only a single medusa. You don't have that strobilation going on. The medusa bell is kind of squarish in cross-section, hence the name box jellyfish. Most Scyphozoan bells are much wider than they are tall, so they look kind of like big plates or big bowls. Cubozoan bells are usually as tall or taller than they are wide. They also have, at each corner of the bell, they've got 4 little flap-like structures called pedalia, and either one or many, depending on what group you're in, tentacles will emerge from the pedalia, And the bell actually has a ring-shaped tissue sheet running around the inside called a velarium. Right, what do these look like? There's a Cubozoan medusa belonging to a species that was only discovered in 2011. You can see that the bell is taller than it is wide, and there are 4 little flap-like extensions, and each one gives rise to a single tentacle. And the tentacles are this beautiful, white and brown striped shape. Those flap-like structures are the pedalia. The order that this is in is called the Carabdiida. Don't worry about remembering that name, but each pedalium bears one single tentacle. And the tentacles are so pretty that when this species was discovered, I can't remember what museum, it might have been the Smithsonian, but I can't remember now. But the institution that sponsored its discovery held a contest to name it. And the winning name was invented by a school teacher who thought that this was such a pretty thing that when people saw it, they would say, "Oh boy." Hence, it is named Tomoya Oboya. There's something of a tradition of scientists giving new species slightly goofy names. Not everybody does it, but there's a number that have a very definite sense of fun. My favorite was the entomologist that discovered a new species of Australian wasp, or a new genus, and named the genus Aha, so that he could write a paper whose title was Aha, a new genus of Australian wasp. There's a number of people that have done goofy things like that. But this is an example of a very cute name, Tomoya Oboya. Incidentally, there's lots of stinging stings or cnidocytes, stinging cells on the tentacles. There are also lots on the bell. If you touch any part of this, you're going to get stung. Which makes me think that instead of calling it Tomoya Oboya, given what these feel like when they sting you, they should have called it Tomoya Okrappa. But oh well, I'm not naming it. And those little whitish flecks on the bell are clusters known as nematocyst batteries. Battery in the sense of like an artillery. A battery is a whole group of cannons, right? An entire unit of multiple cannons all, shooting together. So a nematocyst battery is a whole cluster of cnidocytes that can all fire together. That's why it's called a battery. The other order, each pedalium has numerous tentacles, and this includes the world's deadliest jellyfish, Chironex fleckeri, sometimes called the sea wasp. Again, you see that kind of boxy bell, and each pedalium gives rise to a bundle of tentacles. Being stung with this thing causes agonizing pain. The danger of a jellyfish sting kind of depends on just how much you get. If you got brushed by a single tentacle, you probably wouldn't die. You would just be in agony for a few days. If you swam through all of those tentacles, you'd be at much greater risk. And if you were to swim through a whole bloom of them, you'd really be in trouble. But your risk of death is almost a perfect function of exactly how much length of tentacle you've actually come into contact with. One little brush of one tentacle might not be so bad. Getting wrapped up in this thing would be a lot worse. The treatment is basically just to try to keep you breathing, because enough venom will not only cause pain, but it will start paralyzing your heart and your breathing muscles. It's a muscular toxin. They're not that deadly in that they don't kill hundreds of people each year. 64 recorded deaths in Australia since 1883. That's not even one per year. But of course, the risk of very painful stings, maybe requiring medical intervention, is much higher than that. And in Australia, they will close off beaches at times when there's a risk of blooms of box jellyfish. So they've actually got warning signs there. You can see the caution deadly jellyfish signs. If you get stung, vinegar will not do anything for the stings that have already pierced your skin, but tentacles may contain unfired stings, and vinegar will neutralize those. Use support for breathing and basically just get them to medical aid as fast as you can. Australia is where the deadliest ones are known, but they're starting to be observed in places like Hawaii, Malaysia. There was one death of a child in 1990 in Galveston, Texas. So we do get them in the Atlantic in tropical regions. So yeah, probably not a major concern for most, but try to avoid getting stung with a box jellyfish if you can avoid it, unless you want to kill yourself and donate your organs like Will Smith in that 7 Pounds movie. Right. When box jellies are known to be abundant, at swimming beaches, they'll put up nets to cordon off some safe swimming areas from jellyfish. But there's actually one species that can slip through. This is the so-called irukandji jellyfish. That's a preserved one on the up at the top, and then a living one down there at the bottom. The living one is not scrunched up so much. But you can see that they can slip through nets. They're not much bigger than a match head. And stings from this have not killed anybody as far as I know. But if you get stung, you generally wish you die because you've got something like 3 days of pain ahead of you. Pain so intense that they can give you all the morphine that they can without stopping your breathing, and it still hurts. Yeah, they can give you so much painkiller that they're at risk of stopping your breathing, and you'll still be in agony. It is said to be worse than childbirth, although I've not experienced either one. But it's supposed to be really, really horrible. Irukandji syndrome. In life, the tentacles can extend for a meter, although in that preserved specimen, the tentacles are broken off and probably contracted a lot too. Down in the one below, if you can see, one of those tentacles looks like it's got little rings on it. Those rings are more nematocyst batteries, and you can see nematocyst batteries on the bell too. They're really cool, though. If you neglect the fact that they could kill you, there's at least one box jelly that's actually been observed mating. I'm not sure which one's the male and which is the female, but if you look up at the aboral end of the bell, that's the end away from the mouth and tentacles, you can see that there's some orange, there's orange stuff up there. Those are actually sperm strands, and the male can pick up these sperm strands and transfer them onto the female's tentacle. So this is one of the few jellyfish that actually has mating behavior. And I mentioned that Scyphozoans have these sensory organs on the edge of the bell called rhopalia. Cubozoans have them too. And this is really weird. They've got these multiple eyes with a lens, a retina, and an iris. B and C right there are the same eye in bright light up at the top and low light on the bottom. And you can see the iris actually contracts and expands. Over there in picture A, those pigmented layers are retinas. The thing that looks kind of like a big brown crescent, that's the retinas. And then up on top of that, you can see the big spherical lens. And each rhopalium has an eye facing up, an eye facing down, and then 4 simpler eyes off to the side. And each one of those brown areas on A is one of the eyes. That's weird. The weird thing is the eyes are out of focus, and these guys have a network of nerves, but they don't have a brain as such. They don't have the processing power needed to actually see an image. So box jellies cannot perceive images in anything remotely resembling the way that you do. They just don't have the processing power. What seems to be going on is that eyes like this, even though they're blurry, and even though the jellyfish can't actually process images with them, is that eyes like this seem to be good at detecting motion. So the jellyfish have these and use them as motion detectors. One of the things I talk about when I teach my evolution course is that eyes with a lens and a retina, camera type eyes like what we've got, have actually evolved something like 40 different times independently in the animal kingdom. They're not actually all that difficult to evolve. Some simulation studies done about 15 years ago by two guys named Nilsson and Pelcher actually show that if you just start off with a photosensitive light spot, it is comparatively simple to evolve eyes from, camera type eyes from that. And there's actually 40 separate times where eyes like that have in fact evolved. And one of them is actually in box jellies, even though the corresponding brain power has not evolved to enable the jellies to see images in anything like the way that we can. But they seem to be very sophisticated motion detectors. Jellies are actually, box jellies are pretty strong swimmers. They'll actually chase after prey and try to hunt it down. And there's at least one species, this is a mangrove species from Puerto Rico, that uses those Ropalia shown in the enlarged boxes to fix its position using terrestrial landmarks. It's actually able to perceive mangrove trees, these trees that grow right on the shore of the ocean. They're adapted to salt. And they're able to maintain a steady position, not getting too close to land and not swimming too far out of sight of it, using those upper eyes to spot landmarks, mangrove trees in growing on the shore. And they'll swim close if they can't spot them and swim away if they can. So very nifty tricks that box jellyfish can use using those eyes. Let me see here. It's 11:41. I tell you what, we'll pick up next go round with the hydrozoa, and I'll say more about cnidarians in general, and that should occupy us for plenty of Wednesday. So I'll quit sharing. Wendy says she loves that aquarium. Okay, Taylor, I fixed it so it wasn't full screen. Shivam says, yeah, that's a huge jellyfish. Yeah, I actually got to meet the person who described that, Lisa Gershwin. It's a pretty amazing thing. And Wendy loves that aquarium. If you mean Aquarium of the Americas, that's a great one. The first aquarium to actually put jellyfish on display was the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. And Lisa Gershwin, who I knew, learned how to culture jellyfish. And for a while, she got hired by the Mandalay Bay Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. Yeah, Monterey Bay is the one. That's pretty amazing. But she learned how to do it there, and she got hired by the Mandalay Bay Aquarium in Las Vegas because at the time, the casinos on the Vegas Strip will go all out with shows and art exhibits and all kinds of stuff to get you in there. And for a time, the Mandalay Bay had this enormous aquarium set up. And because she knew how to raise and care for jellyfish, they set up this huge tank, and they'd fly her out there maybe once a month or something like that, and put her up in a nice room and comp all of her meals and pay her some decent money. and she would take care of raising and propagating the jellyfish for them. And she got paid pretty well, and she got to, if that's your idea of a good time, she got to hang out in Las Vegas, and got her meals and her didn't get one of the VIP suites, but got very nice rooms for the time she was down there. So yeah, Vegas is crazy, but never let it be said that you can't sometimes find very interesting ways to make money based on your knowledge of invertebrates. Because now she's Dr. Gershwin and has a great career and wrote a book on jellyfish called Stung, that I think our library has if we ever get to go back into it. And yeah, she got to earn some money in grad school. I had one friend who she earned money by taking care of jellies, and another friend of mine earned money as a naturalist lecturer. She knew a lot about the Amazon, and she got hired by these cruise ship companies that would take these kind of eco tour cruises up the Amazon River, and she got hired to lecture and talk to the people about the life of the Amazon basin. So sometimes knowing this stuff can be the gateway to pretty interesting jobs. Just saying. In case that med school thing doesn't work out, you have other options. So I will switch off recording now.